Two things. Quentin Tarantino could say whatever he wants, but that director, responsible for the most violent movies, no, whether you like him or not, pretty violent, lecturing anyone on violence or police on violence, just weird. And to Robert Davi, the celebrated actor, offensive. Robert, what did you make of that rant?
Well, first off, his initial speech that he gave during that movement last week that started the whole firestorm, I think was misplaced. And then the follow-up from yesterday was also something that look at, everyone's allowed for their free speech. We fight for that. But there's a problem in our society today that I've seen incrementally happening since the 60s. And this is like a callback to that era, Neil, when we had the riots in the streets, cops were called pigs. And it was very interesting. A philosopher called Eric Hoffer wrote a book that people don't talk about anymore, or wrote several things. He was a longshoreman philosopher. Reagan gave him the Medal of Freedom, but he wrote a book called The True Believer about mass movements. He coined the term extended adolescence from the 60s riots. And what we have today is that same kind of, where you have people living off the government and affluent, meaning some celebrities and some affluent people and some privileged people, have a grudge against a certain segment of the society. And then they start to fight back against that. The police, a tiny fraction of our law enforcement, has issues, like any of the population. And it comes from it would have been better had Quentin Tarantino gone to that movement and said, look let's stop the rhetoric and the hate. Let's understand we're grieving for lives that may have been lost innocent because of something that happened. But this is not, I say, the average law enforcement. They're there to protect us, and we should work together. I
always think it's as much the messenger as the message, right? I mean, so you make that pitch, you make that argument, that's one thing. Quentin Tarantino making that pitch with some of the most violent, critically acclaimed movies, I take nothing away from him, talking about that and the type of movies that would spur the very violence, you could argue, would be acted out on streets across this country. He does not seem to be the guy to deliver it. That's all I'm saying.
Right. No, I understand that. I can't speak for that because I do respect him as a filmmaker. There's violent films all over the place. And because he's a pop cultural icon around the world, he could use that
all the more reason to watch what you say. What you say. You're very influential.
Exactly. I wrote an article on Breitbart last week about that. Because of his influence, please at least apologize and watch what you say because you're so influential.
I think he didn't want to do that. I think he felt that if he blinked a little bit, he'd lose a certain appeal among some who are rabid about that, the Black Lives Matter crowd, that sort of thing. And I don't think you want to dial back one iota. And then the next predictable stage is to take it, turn it around on those who are out to get you, blah, blah, blah. I've seen this done on the right and the left. It's a convenient tactic. But insulting.
Yes.
I just think insulting.
Yes, it is. And again, he got support from some of the community. My question, Neil, is why haven't more of the community come out? I called for, 2 months ago, I wrote an article asking for a National Day of Solidarity for law enforcement. I asked the Hollywood community to come out and, in spite of what was going on, say, listen, we want to be able to work with our communities, but no one picks up on that. So they'll come out and they'll do marches for anti-protests that are a negative protest. And we understand lives matter. I'm not saying that. But it's very curious to me that movements continue to happen and generated from this town, from Hollywood, and the right. I blame the right as well. Because when I asked for a National Day of Solidarity, as you had just said, nobody picked up on that. There's no movement to say, you know what, let's band together and pick a day where we're all across the country going to say thank you to law enforcement, that we stand with you, understanding that since Serpico, that we've known that there have been corrupt police officers. And there have been films done about that. Question of Honor is a film that Ben Gazzara did. I mean, so we understand that issue, and we've had that since the 50s, where films have been anti-establishment and also against law enforcement.
Though, you know what they fear, Robert, that is that if you do that sort of thing, then lo and behold, another incident will come up, and then they'll look like fools. What do you tell them?
Well, you tell them you still have to do that because the incident is the individual. It's not the collective. 99% of the police force is there to protect us. If 1% happens to have an incident, you have to understand that. That's going to happen in any part of society. Look, they complain about guns. They complain about guns. Yet yesterday a kid stabbed 7 people with a knife. I remember in China a few years ago.
You're right about that.
I remember in China
wanting to collect knives, and yeah, that's a
collect knives. And in China, several years ago, Neil, there were like 30 people stabbed with knives.
Yeah.
In a classroom situation.
You're right. You're right.
I mean, but no one. So it's very perplexing what's happening in our society today, and our government. And I think the administration hasn't sent the right message to our youth and to the people. When Martin Luther King died, Neil, in that box was the totality of the human struggle. And it was pulled by 2 mules and a sea of people. And Martin Luther King's message was, we're either going to pull it apart or we're going to pull it together. And right now, we have everyone wanting to pull it apart. And that's infuriating to me, and that's why I had to come out and say to Quentin Tarantino, who to me is a modern-day Shakespeare in some of his dialogue, has a responsibility to society, to the youth, to kind of give a different message.
He missed his Shakespearean moment, my friend. But you did not. You did not. Robert, good seeing you again.